The Seismic Shift, Zoran Mamdani and the Economics of Ideology. One of the United States' most iconic metropolises, a global nerve center for finance, culture, and relentless innovation, has just undergone a profound seismic change in leadership. Zoran Mamdani, self-identified as a democratic socialist, has been elected the new mayor of New York City. Some observers are heralding this as an urban revolution. Others are bracing for what they predict will be an inevitable economic catastrophe. However, beneath the immediate headlines, a far more significant transformation is taking place. A shift that could entirely redefine the functional mechanics of American urban centers, the velocity of wealth migration, and the very distribution of political power itself. Today, we must dissect the real, complex meaning of this outcome, not just for the residents of New York, but for every citizen across the nation. There are unique inflection points in history where you can distinctly feel the tectonic plates moving beneath you. Election night in New York was precisely one of those moments. Despite widespread early polling suggesting a razor-thin contest favoring the established candidate, an unexpected narrative began to unfold. Voter turnout surged to unprecedented levels, driven primarily by younger demographics and progressive activists, a coalition energized by a message promising radical systemic upheaval. Yet, a peculiar detail emerged from the early voting data. The raw numbers indicated that over 700,000 citizens had voted early, a four-fold increase from the previous mayoral cycle. Intriguingly, approximately 60% of these early voters were over 44 years old, demographics typically considered to be more moderate, perhaps suggesting that the opposition was equally, if not more, motivated to prevent Mamdani's victory. Nevertheless, Mamdani's coalition successfully surmounted what should have been a substantial electoral hurdle. This was not merely an election victory. It was a clear declaration, a ripple in the heart of New York that threatens to swell into a national political wave. To genuinely grasp the scale of Mamdani's unexpected ascension, one must first confront the visceral, deep-seated anger that propelled it. This is not the superficial rage that dissipates quickly. This is the slow-burning frustration forged over years of witnessing the perpetual cycle of unfulfilled promises, the same entrenched figures maintaining control, and the pervasive feeling that the system functions perfectly for everyone but the ordinary person. Mamdani effectively harnessed this energy, positioning himself as the ideological opposite of figures like Donald Trump, attacking corporate excess and championing sweeping government intervention, while focusing on the economic anxiety felt by the urban working class. When a young professional in New York dedicates over half their income to a cramped rental, or when working-class families struggle to save anything while observing the exponential accumulation of wealth by the ultra-rich, the promise of proposals like rent freezes and increased taxation on the wealthy suddenly becomes powerfully compelling. However, this is the critical juncture where we must transition from emotional appeals to objective mathematics. Winning through emotion is an effortless exercise. Governing requires facing cold, hard, economic realities. And the economic reality currently confronting New York City is profoundly challenging. We must examine the stark numbers. The city's budget relies disproportionately on a remarkably small cohort of high-net-worth individuals. The top 1 or 2% of taxpayers contribute a staggering 40% to 50% of the city's total tax revenue. While the moral argument for increased contribution is valid, the immediate and unforgiving economic reality is that these high earners are highly mobile. They possess the capacity and the means to leave, and data suggests that they are already doing so. Consider the cascading implications. If a small municipality relies on 10 wealthy families for the majority of its services, police, roads, schools, and then simultaneously doubles their tax burden while imposing restrictive regulations, such as perpetual rent controls, those families will inevitably survey the landscape for better options. This phenomenon is not speculative. It is a well-documented pattern that economists across the political spectrum label tax flight. The insidious danger is that this exodus is gradual. A hedge fund quietly relocates its headquarters to Texas. A successful entrepreneur changes their legal residency to Florida. A tech firm expands in a different state instead of Manhattan. Since the top 1% funds nearly half the budget, the loss of even a small percentage of this group rips a disproportionately massive hole in municipal finances. This loss extends beyond direct tax revenue, impacting charitable donations, luxury spending, and local employment ecosystems. When Peter leaves town, Paul might celebrate the policy, but there is simply no one left to pay Paul. The unfortunate historical precedent for this dynamic is not far removed from living memory. In the 1970s, New York City, the financial and cultural capital of the world, came dangerously close to complete collapse. The city had accrued unsustainable fiscal obligations, leading to a severe budget crisis. When the federal government, under President Ford, famously refused a bailout, the city was forced into devastating cuts. Crime surged, services deteriorated, and the middle class accelerated its flight to the suburbs. It required decades of painful, fundamental reforms to restore confidence and rebuild the city. The prosperity of the 2000s and 2010s was not accidental. It was the direct result of policies that prioritized public safety, supported the business community, and attracted the wealth necessary to fund the vast array of premium services New Yorkers came to expect. Prosperity, however, is a fragile construct. It rests entirely on confidence. When new policies are perceived as actively punitive toward success, that vital confidence rapidly erodes, and rebuilding it is an extraordinarily difficult task. This fragility is acutely demonstrated by proposals such as a mandatory rent freeze. Superficially, freezing rents sounds like a compassionate, necessary measure for the vast population of renters struggling with affordability. Yet, the economic ramifications are severe. Landlords, who are not always large, faceless corporations, but often small investors relying on retirement income, do not see their operating costs freeze. Property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance, and utility costs continue to rise. When income is forcibly held static against rising expenses, the inevitable response is to defer maintenance, allowing the housing stock to deteriorate. New construction investment ceases because investors are unwilling to enter a market where revenue is arbitrarily controlled. This creates a supply shortage, which, when the freeze is inevitably lifted, causes an even more dramatic spike in rents to compensate for years of loss. Economists have consistently demonstrated that aggressive rent control functions like a hydrogen bomb for the local housing market. A massive, immediate disruption with devastating long-term consequences. We are observing a direct collision between ideological desire, what people wish would happen, and economic pragmatism, what must happen. The local drama in New York City is inextricably linked to a much larger political narrative unfolding across the nation. While New Yorkers were preoccupied with their local election chaos, a concurrent and equally significant event was the federal criminal investigation launched into California's Proposition 50, a redistricting measure potentially involving illegal mail-in balloting. Whether widespread fraud is confirmed remains secondary to the fact that the investigation and the narrative surrounding it further embeds the corrosive idea that our electoral systems are fundamentally untrustworthy. This pattern is becoming bipartisan. Trump supporters claim Democratic victories are fraudulent. Progressive activists claim Republican efforts are voter suppression. When both sides systematically delegitimize the other, the foundational agreement of democracy, that we accept the results, is shattered. The core question becomes, can democracy function when faith in the scoreboard collapses? The real-world consequences of this ideological warfare manifest in people's daily lives. The potholes do not care about ideology. They are fixed with tax revenue. When wealthy taxpayers are chased out through punitive policy, the resulting decline in essential services, fewer police officers, reduced library hours, delayed maintenance, impacts the working and middle classes most severely. This ideological clash speaks to a deeper conflict over America's foundational identity. The debate centers on two competing visions. Are we a nation that champions and rewards equality of opportunity, independence, and risk-taking? Or are we a nation that views success with suspicion, prioritizing equality of outcome and collective dependence? Mamdani's rhetoric resonates with younger generations who feel profoundly failed by traditional capitalism. Yet, the solutions proposed, universal rent control, government-run enterprises, often ignore the demonstrable lessons of history. Price controls generate scarcity. Inefficient governance creates waste. When politicians attempt to supersede fundamental economic realities through sheer legislative will, reality inevitably prevails. The critical takeaway for the rest of the country is this: what happens in New York will not remain in New York. The documented migration of wealth and talent from high-tax blue states, like New York and California, to low-tax red states, like Texas and Florida, is actively redrawing the economic and political map of the United States. Florida has imported nearly $1 trillion in income over the past decade. Texas is now establishing its own stock exchange, challenging New York's historic financial dominance. These shifts are not symbolic. They are massive transfers of economic power, jobs, and tax revenue. Furthermore, political representation, electoral votes, congressional seats, follows population. The map of American political power is being redrawn, not by politicians in Washington, but by millions of individual decisions about where success can be built and maintained. We are standing at a crucial, historical turning point. Two distinct paths lie ahead. The first is collapse and recovery, where the city's finances deteriorate to the point of undeniable crisis, forcing painful but necessary pragmatic reforms, mirroring the trajectory of the 1970s. The second is adaptation and reinvention, where the new leadership miraculously recognizes the economic constraints and finds genuinely creative, non-punitive ways to achieve their progressive goals without dismantling the foundation. While history offers discouraging odds for the latter, the next few months will provide clarity. We are witnessing a collision where passion, anger, and hope meet the unyielding forces of mathematics, economic incentives, and human nature. Mamdani's victory proves that people are demanding profound change. The fundamental question is whether the change offered will truly improve lives, or whether it will simply repeat historical mistakes that guarantee economic failure. The decisions made in New York will echo across the country for years to come. It is essential that we understand what is truly happening, not merely what we are told is happening.